I chose chapter 3, which was related to population ecology and population growth. I'm explaining this through the Permian and Triassic extinction, and my narrator is a dinosaur. So he's going to explain to you that during the Permian period, most organisms were in the ocean. Then Siberia erupted, which was, a volcano in Siberia erupted, caused a ton of CO2 production, got trapped in the atmosphere, and then ripped a hole in the ozone layer, caused global warming. And since most of the organisms were in the ocean temperatures increased. There was no oxygen because there was smog over the ocean, so the plants couldn't photosynthesize. And most of the organisms suffocated and died because they couldn't breathe. Oxygen in this case was a limiting factor, and limiting factors can be density independent or density dependent. In this case, it was density independent because the organism did nothing to cause the volcanic eruption. But if it was density dependent, it would be that the organism was responsible in inhibiting its own population growth. And the limiting factor is anything that inhibits population and their growth. So we see most of the Permian creatures going extinct, but one of the Permian creatures gets to land. And we learned that in high school, eventually, animals get from the ocean to land. They don't really specify how, and I think they just sum it up to curiosity, but this makes more sense considering a Permian extinction event made it so that the ocean was no longer suitable for organisms to live in, so they had to move to land. And so that's where we see Grandma, which is the ancestor of dinosaurs and the ancestor of us. She is now above land with a bunch of big plants, and these big plants produce a ton of oxygen. So oxygen is not a limiting factor for her. She also doesn't have to deal with fighting with her brothers or other organisms for food, so she has no competition. That's not a limiting factor for her either. She has a high carrying capacity considering the fact that she can just eat whatever she wants, go wherever she wants, and have babies with grandpa. Sounds like a pretty good gig. Normally, she would fall under a K category animal, which means that she experiences growth relative to her carrying capacity, logistical growth. But because of the fact that she has little to no limiting factors, she experiences exponential growth, which is the R value. Think quality versus quantity. K value is she has energetically intensive babies that really she puts a lot of energy into and a lot of resources into, and she wants most of them to live. Versus an R category animal would be like a mosquito who produces 200 offspring in 2 weeks, and if 100 of them die, it's fine because they produced 100 other of the offspring. So survival rates with mosquitoes doesn't matter in the same way that survival rate with baby dinosaurs matters. And that's the difference between K and R category animals. So she has a ton of babies with grandpa. They get real busy. They have the Triceratops, the T-Rex, and the Spinosaurus. Obviously, I'm jumping throughout the generations, but eventually, grandma has children. Those children go under speciation because there's a ton of space, so they go through dispersion. They they create large distances between themselves. They choose different diets and exhibit different behaviors. And so after grandma has a bunch of babies, we see a lot of biodiversity because we see a lot of speciation. And that is so that the dinosaurs can continue to survive. And what's really important is that this speciation and biodiversity led to the eventual survival of the dinosaur race. Even though we don't see dinosaurs today that are massive, we still see, we know that they existed because we are their descendants. So right here is another species that evolves. This is the first placental mammal. And it's right next to our little narrating dinosaur. Super tiny compared to our dinosaur. Should be eaten. Should not have survived. So why is it that we're alive and the dinosaurs aren't? Well, the most the organism that survives is the organism that's best able to adapt to the environment. And because we had another independent limiting factor come in, a density independent limiting factor, which was when an asteroid hit Mexico and it caused a ton of volcanic eruptions, it dried out the earth and the soil was no longer able to retain water. So plant systems were uprooted and there were a ton of storms because of global warming. That whole process happened again. And so if you were above ground, you could not survive. And these dinosaurs were way too big to go underground. They also relied on live plant matter. And most of the plants were dead. So dead plant matter was a limiting factor for these dinosaurs, but not for the ancestors of the mammals, the crocodiles and reptiles, and the birds. Because our little placental mammal went underground, relied on dead plant matter and insects. Those guys work together because insects love dead plant matter. The bird ancestor also loved dead plants, and the crocodile ancestor was able to go really long periods of time without food and was far enough from Mexico so that it didn't experience the same effects as the organisms in oceans nearby, like, say, the Gulf of Mexico. Those organisms in the Gulf of Mexico were screwed. But this crocodile was lucky. It was far enough to where it wasn't affected in the same way. So, what's important in this is we see that both dinosaurs and these organisms experience exponential growth when they are K category animals. Humans are also K category animals that are also experiencing exponential growth. And what's important to understand about this entire diagram is that unless humans limit how much they are exploiting from the earth, they will cause their own extinction, but it will be a density dependent factor, meaning that humans will be the organism that causes their own population growth to decrease. So knowing this, maybe it'll motivate people to start making better decisions so that we don't cause even more changes to our environment. Thank you.